Hello everyone, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this YouTube live session on how do you create your personalized study plan. And let me reduce my speaker. So first things first, can you guys hear me clearly? Select yes, or rather type in yes if you can hear me clearly. Otherwise, you may type in no. So if you can hear me clearly, do let me know. You can post your comment as yes. All right, perfect. Okay, just what I wanted to know. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening once again, and welcome to this webinar on how to create your personalized study plan. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. In this webinar, we're going to look at a few things. We want to make sure that we help each one of you create your own personalized study plan. And I also want to tell you, hey, once you have that plan, how should you study? What are the various stages of learning, and how do you map yourself in those stages of learning? But before we get there, what I want to do is I want to kind of understand this group a bit more. So we're going to really get a profile of this group, and then we're going to go towards this agenda item is actually incorrect. Hold on, just 1 second. So we're going to get a profile of this group. So this is where we'll do that. And then we're going to go into some sort of a foundation of a GMAT score as to, okay, what's this GMAT score made up of? Just because that very foundation would help us create a personalized study plan. And then we're going to take a case study and take an example of Chase and Abby to really see how do you build that personalized study plan, and how, once you have that study plan, how do you focus on learning? All right. So let's kind of look at this. What is your target GMAT scores? Type in A, B, or C based on where your score falls in. So if it's between 600 and 700, type A. If it's 710 to 730, type B. And if it's higher than 740 or higher, then type C. All right, we have a few Bs, we have some As. Let's get a few more responses. And it's good to see folks who are joining from Facebook as well over here. All right. A few Bs, a few Cs over here. That is good. All right. So then let's go towards the next question, which is how many hours have you spent preparing for the test? And again, A, B, and C, you can see the numbers over there. A is fewer than 50, B is 51 to 100, and C is more than 100 hours. Okay, lots of people in the C bracket here, more than 100 hours. Let's get a few more responses as we get there. And then now let's go to, we have some people in A and B as well. Now let's go to question 3. The third question is, have you experienced a score plateau? And this is really true for people who spend more than 50 hours preparing, where your score has been stagnant despite you putting in studying. A is yes and B is no. So for the third question is, have you experienced a point where, hey, you can be putting in effort, but your score doesn't seem to improve? So you can say A or B, or you can say yes or no, either way. Okay, we have a mix of A and B both. All right. Again, you would feel this only if you put in 60 to 70 hours studying. If you put in fewer than 70 hours studying, you will likely not see this. It doesn't usually happen in the first 70 hours. It happens more common with people who spend over 100 hours. All right. So now this is an open-ended poll question. What does a study plan do? So what do you think what's the purpose of a study plan? What do you think is the purpose of a study plan? This is an open-ended question. So there's no A, B, or C. You have to just from your own opinion, from your own experience. And when you think of a study plan, what do you think about as the role of that particular study plan? Let's get some qualitative data, okay, to get your desired result. What else? to help you reach. Okay, but to maintain consistency, all right. Make milestones for the progress, focus learning. All right. Okay, so there's some really good responses. Okay, one is, okay, I want something that helps me get to the score. The second piece is, I want to make sure that I get to that score efficiently. Then the third is something that gives me confidence that I'm actually getting there. And I also got a response where saying, hey, it helps me improve on weekly. So we're going to really see good. So these are good responses. A good study plan should do all of these things. Okay, so what should a study plan do? It will answer this question: how will I reach my target GMAT score? It will tell you where should you put in that time to reach that particular score, and how much time you need to put in. And again, as you're putting in that time over here, it will also tell you the improvement that you would attain overall. Okay, so with that as a foundation, let's get into okay, how is that GMAT score built up? Okay, and one thing that I want you to take away from this particular part is that your GMAT score is built up of what I call as abilities overall, and we're going to really talk about that. So when you think about GMAT, everyone looks at the score out of 800 over here, and they say, hey, I want to get a 700 out of 800, a 720, a 730, a 760 out of 800. And that's kind of where everyone's focus is, and which is good. I mean, that's kind of what these schools look at. But the thing that you need to understand is that score out of 800 is built out of those scores two scores, one in quant and one in verbal. And then your quant score is further built out of two subsectional scores, one in arithmetic, the other one in algebra geometry. On the verbal side, we have these three subsectional scores. The beauty of this is there's a common denominator across these scores. And what is that denominator? It's a denominator of percentiles or ranks. So when you get a score out of 800, so when you get a 760 out of 800, that is equivalent to a 99th percentile. Now, when you get a Q50 over here, that today is equivalent to 83rd percentile. When you get a V40 over here, that is equivalent to 91st percentile. So each of these scores have a rank. So when you get a quant score, you get a rank out of all the GMAT test takers as to how good you are. When you get a verbal score, you get a rank as well. And similarly, you do get the same ranks over here at each of these subsectional levels. And so when I think about your GMAT score, I like to think in terms of these ranks. Why? Because it allows me to map this rank into a rank over here and into a rank over here. And this allows me to map this rank into the ranks over here. And once I map it at this level, I can then design my study plan to achieve those ranks. And once I do that, then essentially my GMAT preparation is a set of 5 individual mini study plans. And these are the milestones that I'm tracking. So let's kind of take a look at this and say, why do we say that? The official GMAT has these 5 independent engines, and the key over here is independence, which means that these engines, the score that you get in arithmetic has very little impact on what you get in algebra. What you get in sentence correction has very little impact on what you get in critical reasoning. Okay, so the beauty of this is, which means you can study for each one of these independently, and then when you combine this, you basically get that score out of 800 essentially. And why do we know, and this may be a surprise to you, because this is not something that's out there, that these abilities are more or less independent. Why do we know this? Because we used a lot of data. We actually did a lot of experiments over here where we actually took 1,000 ESRs and we got all of these abilities, and we really said, hey, how do these abilities correlate with that score out of 800? And as we ran a multiple regression, what we found was that this R square, for those of you who know what regression is, was incredibly high, upwards of 99%, which means these subsectional abilities, when they act independently, can predict that score out of 800 independently. And this is the solid line over here is essentially the regression predicted line, and the dots over here are the actual scores from ESR. And you can really see they map very, very nicely onto this. Also, GMAT Club did some analysis, and this analysis was done on the official GMAT Prep software in the year 2017, where what they did was they said, hey, we're going to make mistakes in two subsections, and we're going to answer every question correctly in the third subsection and see if in that particular third subsection, if we can get a high ability score. And so they did that. And as they did that, they said, I'm only going to answer sentence correction questions correctly. And as they did that, they were able to get a really high percentile in sentence correction while achieving very low percentiles consequently in reading comprehension and critical reasoning. Now, you can't get a high percentile in sentence correction if you don't get served difficult questions. You can't get a high percentile if SC, the difficulty level of questions that were served to you in SC were somehow related to how you performed in CR or how you performed in RC. And this kind of showed their independence again, that they're able to repeat the same thing with the CR and RC, showing that these subsections are more or less independent. Okay. And actually, ESRs show that as well. Here's an ESR of a student and there are tens of those ESRs that we have, where here a student has gotten a 0 percentile score in critical reasoning, yet is able to get an 87 percentile in sentence correction and 76 percentile in critical reasoning, 0 percentile in reading comprehension, I'm sorry. And again, these are not as common because people don't do these experiments on the actual GMAT. It costs $250, but you see those ESRs over there as and when they happen. Okay. And the reason why it's really important to know the independence and really important to know the subsectional abilities is because when you're aiming for a certain GMAT score, a certain verbal, a certain quant score, there are many ways to get there. And if you understand that these subsectional abilities are independent of one another, you can really get the most optimal way to get to your target verbal, target quant score, and consequently your target GMAT score. Okay. And it's when you make this personalized study plan, that's when you take about 40% less time. That's when you actually increase the probability of getting to that end score quite a bit. In fact, as much as twice as much. Now that we know this independence of subsectional abilities, now that we know how the GMATs scored, let's kind of see how do we achieve high subsectional abilities. Why? Because unless and until we achieve those subsectional abilities, you're not going to be able to get to that high GMAT score. Okay, so the first thing you need to do that is you need to get your starting abilities over here. You need to be able to really say, hey, this is where I am in SC, CR, RC, arithmetic, and algebra. How many of you over here know these starting abilities or know where you currently are in these subsections? Type in yes if you know, type in no, otherwise if you don't know that. How many of you know that hey, this is where I am in each of these subsections? And again, you may not know it to this precise degree over here. You may have a reasonable enough idea. Type yes if you know this, type no if you don't know this. Okay, let's get a few more responses. All right, many of you seem to know this. That's good. Now, here is my other question. How would you approach improving to 80th percentile? If you don't know this, I'm going to tell you how can you figure that out. But the second question is, how would you approach improving to that 80th percentile in sentence correction, where you're currently in 29th, you're currently at 29th percentile. So how would you do that? If you're at 29th percentile currently, what would you do if you want to get to that 80th percentile score? So half the people said no, they don't know it. The other half said They do know it, but I think the next big question is, if you know that, how would you get there? So the case that I'm presenting to you is, you're really weak in SC, you want to get to that 80th percentile, you want to be among the top 20% of all the test takers out there. How would you approach this problem? That's a big question, by the way. All right. Get the concepts right, meaning-based solving. All right. A few more responses. Work on fundamentals. Practicing 1 to 2 hours per day. What else? Let's get a few more things. And the variety of responses over here kind of shows how people approach this problem overall. And the next question which is there is, how would this differ for CR, where you're currently at 59 percentile? Now, remember, the goal is to get 80th percentile in CR. So here also you want to get to that 80th percentile. And here also you want to, of course, get to that 80th percentile. So how would that approach differ? All right, so let's see how does what the difference is, because people who actually make to that 730, 740 score understand that difference and spend their time accordingly. So what I want to introduce you to is what I call as a 3 stages of learning. And these are the stages of learning of stages which we go through while we're learning anything, whether it's sentence correction, whether it's number properties, whether it's geometry, whether it's I mean, anything you want to learn, you're going to go through these stages. The first stage that I want to call is what we call as learning concepts and methods. Okay, in this stage, what you do is you master all the concepts that are tested in each subsection, and you learn how to apply those concepts. So what it really means is that, hey, I know the 3 or 4 ways in which verb-ing modifiers are used. I know how to do the right kind of comparisons, what's the correct construction. I know how to make a parallel list properly. I know what noun plus noun modifier can modify, what it cannot modify. So that's kind of knowing the concepts. I know what's the, what's the right way to organize a sentence with subject and verb. I know what is a strengthener. I know, the various things with regards to numbers and on a number line, and so on and so forth. I understand the difference between a non-negative versus a positive number, and so on and so forth. I know these nuances, and then I can apply these nuances to answer a question that's structured in the GMAT form. Why? Because, hey, you may know the concepts, and you may be able to answer, questions on sentence completion in GRE, but you may not, by knowing the same concepts, you may not be able to answer a sentence correction question. So when you learn concepts and methods, you learn concepts first, and then you also learn how to apply those methods in a proper way. And you have a method to solving questions. Then the second stage of learning is where you focus primarily on methods. In the first stage, you're learning concept first, and then you are learning how to apply them. In the second stage, you say, I know 80 to 90% of the concepts. I'm going to focus on applying those methods. Okay, and over here, your focus is efficiency and accuracy over here. But as you do that, you may find there are certain conceptual gaps. There are certain concepts that don't come very naturally to us, where we need to go back and revise twice or thrice. And you may do that, but primarily 80% of your time over here is spent on mastering application, making yourself more efficient. And then the third stage is refining to perfection. Now let me just erase this over here and then see, okay, at the end of first stage, if you've done this properly, what should your ability be? At the end of first stage, if you've learned the concepts, if you have a solid method to solving questions, you should be between 50th to 60th percentile ability. Okay, that's where the starting stage of mastering methods is. If you're not there, you cannot be mastering methods. Okay, why? Because you don't know enough concepts, or you don't have a solid enough method. All right. Once you mastered the methods, you start to hit that 80th percentile, so 75th to 80th percentile, and then when you get to refine to perfection, that's when you start to hit that 95th percentile, so 90th to 95th. So it's really important to know which stage you are in so that you can study accordingly. If you don't study accordingly, you basically don't improve, and that's when you hit that score plateau. Okay. So if you're at stage 1, tell me how should you practice. You have 3 options over here. So again, remember that guy who was at 29 percentile in sentence correction, and that particular guy studied the concept of subject-verb agreement. Immediately following this, what should this guy do? Option A says solve questions that test the conceptual knowledge of subject-verb agreement, and then try and solve full-length questions that primarily test SV. Option 2 is don't bother solving questions. Option 3 is open the official guide, solve the questions that are tagged as agreement. Which option? And yes, this is the same for quant and verbal. Which one would you take? A, B, or C? Let's get it. Let's get a few more responses. Yes, it's option A, right? It's very natural that's what you do. Now tell me, how many of you do it that way? How many of you say, hey, I am in stage 1 of learning. This is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to blindly practice questions. I'm not going to practice hard questions over here when I'm in stage 1, because I know I'm in stage 1. I should not be solving hard questions. So how do you excel in stage 1? The way to excel in stage 1 is you study a set of concepts, you evaluate yourself in that particular set. Plus, if you've studied, prior sets. So let's say you're studying pronouns. So you typically study pronouns after you've studied subject verb. So when you are in stage 1, after you've studied pronouns, you've got to solve questions again, which test you in subject verb as well as pronouns, and then you continue to do that. So you study a set of concepts, and let's say subject verb, pronoun, and so on and so forth, or inference, assumption, evaluate, so on and so forth. As you're studying that set of concepts, evaluate yourself in those concepts, and at a conceptual level, that's very important. And then you also solve full-length questions that test that particular concept. You have to get feedback at each of these stages so that you know that you've learned that particular concept well, and then you go on and study the next set of concepts. Okay, so what's important to excel stage 1? The first thing which is there is feedback. You really need feedback. It's very few people just blindly read a book and excel at a conceptual level. Okay, for most people, you need about 50 to 60 feedback points to do this. The second piece is you should not be solving hard questions here. Access to easy and medium questions. Why? Because you're building that strength over here. Okay, and solutions that tell you when you falter and where you falter, so that you can improve right then and there. And yes, Shrey, I am suggesting that you perfect one topic and then move to the other. That's how we all learn. Okay. Now, mistakes that people do. And this is really important. Why? Because a lot of you will associate with what you do over here. One of the most common things that I hear people doing is to really say, hey, I am solving the official guide to learn sentence correction. No, the official guide is a really bad way to improve yourself in stage 1. Official guide is designed for stage 2, not for stage 1, and that too in a methodical fashion. So mistakes that people do while learning is, if you're at 29 percentile, you're solving official guide, it's not going to help you. You're going to actually see your scores stagnate more or less. Why? Because you're not learning those concepts individually. You don't get any feedback at a conceptual level. You get questions that test multiple concepts. If you don't know subject verb, but you know modifiers, an unlikely case, but let's say that is the case, then you'd make a mistake because you don't know subject verb, even though you're solving the modifier part correctly. But would you know that? Would the data tell you? Absolutely not. Would you improve at the subject verb level? Not really. The second piece that people do is they say, I have to hit a 740. I'm going to solve the hardest questions without recognizing, hey, you have to hit a 740, but you are at that 29 percentile in sentence correction or in number properties. You have to first make sure you solve easy and medium questions correctly rather than solving hard or very hard questions. And people have this belief, hey, I'm going to solve question and question and question after question. The key to success is solving 4,000 questions, and that's how I'm going to do that. What people don't recognize is that students who ace the GMAT actually learn from solutions. They don't blindly solve questions. And again, the key thing is, if you are in stage one, you're not going to be able to benefit from solving hard questions. Even when you are in stage two, the benefit comes from reviewing the solutions. If you just, and again, the metric over here is, if you're spending 2 minutes solving a question, you should be spending 7 to 8 minutes reviewing a solution of a question that you've answered correctly, and a high quality solution. If that's a question that you've answered incorrectly, you should spend between 10 to 14 minutes reviewing that solution. Why? Because there is a lot of learning to do. If you don't spend that time, how will you ensure that you don't repeat the same mistake? And the third thing, which is again, people who primarily read using books, or even when you're watching video, they read chapter after chapter after chapter, or they watch video after video. They really say, hey, I'm going to finish all the learning theory in 2 days, and then I'm going to just solve questions. And that's kind of my way to success. No, you don't hit 90th percentile. This is not your school exam. Remember, the difference is, when you're studying for a school test, or when you're studying for, even when you are within a university, you're studying for that test. If when 100 people take that test, 80 out of them can get a score of 95, and that's perfectly okay. Why? Because that happened in a school test, not on the GMAT. Why? A GMAT is a zero-sum game. If you are getting to that 95th percentile, you are being better than someone else. Someone else isn't getting there. So the exam is different. The way it's scored is different. The way you have to study is different. When you are aiming for that 95th percentile, you're aiming to be better than 95% of the test takers worldwide. What it really means is that you have to study accordingly. And the last piece, which is there, is that, hey, actually there are two more. There's this focus on finishing the course. I have allocated 5 days, and I thought I'm going to study 3 hours per day overall, but essentially I wasn't able to study for a day, but I'm still going to finish the course in 5 days. Doesn't matter if I'm not performing well while taking the course. Doesn't matter if the course was telling me that hey, you didn't do that particular parallelism quiz properly. You still have conceptual gaps, and say, I've got to finish that course in 5 days, I'm going to do that. No, acing the test is not about finishing the course. It's about excelling in it. If you don't excel in it, you're going to have those conceptual gaps over there, and they're going to haunt you later on. And this last piece, which is there, is getting bored, where you say, hey, I'm going to just study SC for 3 days, do about 30% of it. Then I'm going to move over to CR, or then I'm going to move over to number properties, and then come back. And that's a really bad habit as well. Why? Because you don't let that information sink in. Yes, it's difficult to study one topic for 7 to 10 days. But again, there's a reason why 95th percentile is 95th percentile. People who go through that who overcome that mental barrier are the ones who get there. People who are mentally strong. It's acing the GMAT is 70 to 80% about having that mental strength to be able to study consistently, to be able to put in effort, and to be able to take feedback. If you want to get to that high score, if you want to get those scholarships, those admits, you have to have that mental strength. If you don't have that mental strength, you're going to make these mistakes. These are very natural outcomes, and you're going to find that you're going to find that, hey, you'll struggle to improve in the time frame that you've allocated. All right, how many of you make any of these mistakes or have made these mistakes in the past? How many of you have done that? Okay, we have a few folks who've done these. And Anupama, I'm going to take the case study to answer your question. So just hold tight for about another 10 minutes or so. Okay. The key thing which is there is, don't say you're going to get to that 730 score if you're not willing to put in the time and effort to build that strong foundation. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to get there. Okay. Now let's get to stage 2, where you're going to go from that 60th percentile to that 80th percentile. Let's see what does it take to master stage 2. So let's see what is it that you know coming into stage 2. You know most of the concepts that you need to study. You have a methodical approach, and it's a proper approach that works well for you for medium difficulty questions. Okay, and your starting ability is upwards of 50th percentile. Now remember, this stage is at every subsectional level. All right, you can't say that I'm a V32 or a V35 and I'm stage 2 and everything. No, you may be a V34, but you may be in a stage 1 in RC and you may be in stage 3 in FC. So having that distinction is really important if you want this to succeed. Now, what's the goal of this stage? The goal is to improve to that 80th percentile, and you do that by perfecting the process to answer questions and by uncovering any specific weakness. All right. What do you need for this? For this stage, you need 2 things. One is high quality questions that are categorized by difficulty, and they should be coupled with consistent solutions. That's something which is an input. And then as a process piece, what you need is a strategic review process where when you make a mistake or even when you solve a question correctly, how are you going to revise a solution to benefit from the same? Okay. If you want to understand how do you build a strategic review, here's a high-level overview. When I share the PDF, I'm going to share this video with you, which is how do you do a strategic review. Okay. So we have some upcoming webinars if you want to learn as to how do you go through these stages in specific topics. So we have a webinar, probably one of the most popular webinars, on how do you master GMAT sentence correction by focusing on meaning and logic. That's on December 8th. Next Tuesday, I'm doing a YouTube live session on how to build an error log and critical reasoning. That's next Tuesday, I think the 3rd of December. And then we have another session on from concepts to excellence in number properties. That's next Sunday. So these 2, you can go to e-GMAT.com and from the homepage register. This is a YouTube live session over here. So why is it that most people don't hit that 90th percentile? And I say most people don't hit that 90th percentile because it is that 90th percentile. And as a company, as e-GMAT, we've helped 40,000 students ace the GMAT, or a good number of those 40,000 students have aced the GMAT, and we track a lot of data points for every student. So on an average, in the year 2019, we track about 600 data points per student now. So people who are, and we've had our share of students who are successful, we've had our share of students who are unsuccessful as well. So we've really a good amount of data from some students at each stage. Here's what we find with unsuccessful students. They don't do stage 1 properly. They don't review their mistakes. They focus on solving thousands and thousands of questions. And they'll just solve questions from any source, and even those that are not reliable. And the problem with that is, if a question is from a source that is not reliable, then the answer is speculative. If the answer is speculative and you don't know that, you start to doubt your conceptual understanding. You actually start messing up with the proficiency you built during stage 1. Okay. The other piece which is there is, they say, the moment people start learning, they say, I've got to learn and I've got to master the tricks that are required to ace, number properties or to ace sentence correction or to ace reading comprehension. I'm going to do this. And I've seen people who are at that 20th percentile in number properties or arithmetic, and what they're focusing on is, hey, how do I focus on back solving? How do I kind of really figure out how do you get to this answer quickly? Now that's good. You should know how to do the back solving approach. You should know how to get to these answers quickly, but not when you are on that 20th percentile. Reach that 70th percentile, do that, and you're going to find that when you learn those back solving methods, once you've hit that 70th percentile, you'd be able to apply those methods a lot more consistently, but not at that 20th percentile. Successful students actually go slow. When I say go slow, they don't take longer, but they go through each stage properly. They use feedback and do a strategic review of mistakes, and they seldom repeat those mistakes. Why? Because the whole point of doing a strategic review is not repeating those mistakes. And they actually surprisingly solve way fewer questions than people who are not successful. One of the things that I see so many people who ace the GMAT and on GMAT Club, or who don't ace the GMAT, but there's this group of people who take the test 5 times, 6 times, and half of them ace the GMAT, the other half don't. But what you're going to find really is that, hey, when they ace the GMAT in the 5th or the 6th or the 4th attempt, they followed the right approach. It's not about, and the takeaway that some people have is you've got to take the test this many times to ace the GMAT. No, the takeaway that you need to really see is what did they do during that 5th, during that 6th attempt to ace the GMAT. Why? Because they finally found that right approach. That's why they couldn't get it during the first 4 attempts. And I talked about data, and I said, we do a lot of research, and we wrote this article which says what causes success on the GMAT. This was something that we wrote sometime in October, and in this, what we did was we actually researched 600 students across 500 data points for each student, so about 300,000 data points, and we really outlined what is it that successful students do, and what is it that unsuccessful students do, and there are certain key takeaways from here. And when I say takeaways, data points, and this is something that that you guys, I'd like you guys to infer. Now, remember, I said 500 odd data points per student or so is what we took. This is data primarily from the first half of 2019, when we would take 500 points. Now we take about 600. Now, these are successful students, and this is just the sentence correction course. Sorry about that. Just the SC course in e-GMAT, and this is just during stage 1, as you can see over here. Now, what you have over here is these are their end scores. Now, in stage 1, we I think provide about 87 points of feedback, where you're learning concepts and mastering methods. And at that point, what you see is, first of all, their average score at a conceptual level and their average score at an application level. Now, one thing that you would notice is that people who get to these scores, these are fairly high scores, and each one of these, has written a debrief on GMAT Club. So you can really just Google this username on GMAT Club and read their debriefs and read their stories. But what you're going to find is that they didn't excel at everything right from the very beginning. They excelled at things most of the time, which means they were studying things properly, but they also got feedback. They got corrective actions. Okay. For Rohit, this guy is Rohit Malan. He's an IAS officer from India. He got 10 corrective action points for a GMAT Club moderator who improved from a V27 to a V42. He got 8 corrective feedback points, and each feedback points is composed of is an accumulation of 30 minutes of learning that you do on the platform. For Sirish, who got a V42 as well, he got 15 corrective action points, and they use that corrective action point to focus and correct the mistakes that they were making. Now, unsuccessful students, when they do stage 1, again, the same 87 feedback points. The first data point that you see over here is a lot lower concept scores, and primarily a lot lower application scores. Even when the concept scores are high, the application scores are low. The second thing that you would notice is, what else do you notice over here? How is this different from that of successful students? How is this different? Can you guys type in? How is this different? One thing that you'd notice is that the number of corrective feedback points that these guys got Even when, so this guy improved on this, but the number of corrective feedback points is typically high, which means that when they were learning the lesson in the first go, they weren't as focused. They did not do it as consistently. So as we delve deeper into it, people who do this successfully, they would learn sentence correction for 5 days. And because of that consistency, they would actually get, they would do more lessons properly than not. These guys, on the other hand, and each one of them was unsuccessful, they would actually stretch their sentence correction learning to 15 days. They would learn for 3 days, then go study something else. And they would come back for another couple of days and go learn something else. And because of which, they got more corrective action points. Okay. So now let's kind of go into this. Now let's go to stage 2, successful students. Same guys. Okay. Here are the accuracies in easy questions, medium questions, and hard questions. Now this is stage 2, so which means they went to a Scholarium platform. And then over here, what you see is the total number of questions that they attempted. And there are a few things that you would notice. Again, this is just in sentence correction, not anywhere else. Just in sentence correction. So just one subsection of the GMAT. A few things that you would notice is that pretty much all of them got most of easy questions correctly. Upwards of 80% accuracy on an average in medium questions. Okay, as you can really see. Now, when it comes to hard questions, even when you hit that 95th percentile ability, you're not going to solve all hard questions. Okay, typically 70 to 71% is what your accuracy will be at hard questions. So when you really say this, hey, I'm able to answer, and this is another common comment that I read on GMAT Club as well as on some Facebook forums, is I'm able to answer 90% of the official questions correctly, yet my verbal score is V27. No, that isn't the case. There's something wrong in what you're doing. Those questions are very representative. Okay, but we know that people who get to that 90th percentile, even they make mistakes in 25 to 30% of hard questions. So that's something which is there. But so when you say you're answering 90% of official questions correctly or 80% of official questions correctly, most of the times, what the truth really is, you already knew those questions from somewhere else, or you're not doing the math properly. And one of the other things that you would notice is these aren't that many questions to solve in stage 2. This guy over here was a retaker. He did not study properly in the first attempt, and that's why you see very many questions answered for him. But for most, and similarly, Nishant was a retaker as well, and he actually did not study properly in the first go, but in the second go he studied properly, and that's why you need more questions. But these 3 guys did just one attempt with us, and you can see that that they did not have to solve that many questions. Once you have the right foundation, you don't need that many questions to hit that 90th percentile. These are unsuccessful students. The same data points for unsuccessful students. You can see their verbal scores over here. You can see their end GMAT scores over here. Again, difference starts to come when you start hitting medium difficulty questions. Not that much high accuracy. And when it comes to hard difficulty questions, pretty much most of the times you're going to see those numbers are lower than 50%. In fact, way lower than 50%. But the other piece which is not here over here is the number of questions that these guys solved. Most of them, and I don't know if I have this on the next slide. Let's see. Most of them actually solved more than 400 questions. Okay. And these people also, beyond solving 400 questions on our platform, also solved questions on GMAT Club and a bunch of other places. So again, if you're an unsuccessful student, you're most likely, if you're not doing stage 1 properly, you're most likely going to spend more time preparing, yet get a lower score. Does this resonate with any one of you? I mean, have you made the same mistakes? Have you experienced this journey where you say, I've been solving these questions, things don't seem to be improving? and yet I'm making those mistakes. And the beauty of this is, if you're this unsuccessful guy, the actual GMAT will tell you that. Has that happened with anyone over here? All right, let's get some inputs. All right. I don't know if YouTube isn't refreshing or. So the first thing that you need to do is, when you're learning, you need to figure out which stage of learning you are in, and then you need to create this map over here. And remember, if you are lower than 50th percentile or 55th percentile, you are in stage 1 of learning. If you are between the 55th to 80th percentile, you are in stage 2. And of course, if you're higher than that, you're in stage 3. So now let's see how we can have with that foundation with us. Let's see how each one of you can create your own personalized study plan. Okay, to do that, there are 3 steps. One is to get those starting abilities. Okay. The second is to create those milestones. The third is to make sure that you're learning the right way depending on those starting abilities. So how do you quantify those starting abilities? Take a sigma x mock. Okay. And sigma x mock is an e-GMAT designed mock. It's you get 1 free mock, by the way, so you guys can do that, and it'll give you your 5 starting abilities in sentence correction, critical reading comprehension, arithmetic, and algebra. So you know those starting points. Okay. So this is a screenshot, and you'll get a quant and a verbal score. By the way, it asks you what is your target quant score if you don't have one, and then you can drill down and you can really see, okay, what is your arithmetic ability, what is your algebra ability, and just by doing this over here, compared to arithmetic versus algebra, this is a primary area of improvement. That's something which is there. Now it also gives you your PS and DS, and then you can really see, as you really see in DS, there's a consistent weakness. PS, you seem to be doing well over here, but even in the subsection where you have high ability, which is algebra geometry, DS is a problem. So the 2 takeaways just from this view is hey, you need to focus on arithmetic and you need to focus on DS questions all over. Just by taking this mock test, you get that insight. Now, this is a very exciting piece over here, where, because remember, you now had that 47th percentile in arithmetic, 43 out of 60. You need to know where to focus my energy on, and to do that, we further drill down and have this chart. And what this chart really shows us your accuracy versus difficulty level. Now, for those of you who've taken the GMAT, this is very similar to the ESR chart that you get over there, but it's much more easy to comprehend. Now, how do I read this? When questions are medium difficulty, remember this is medium difficulty, the guy is able to do 80% of the questions correctly. Now, there are 4 out of 5 questions he's able to solve correctly. When the difficulty level increases to medium hard, and let's just rub this, when the difficulty level increases to medium hard, he's able to do all of those correctly. Now, and you can really see he's taking about 2 minutes, 13 seconds per question. There are about 5 questions, so a good number of questions over here. But when difficulty increases to hard over here, his accuracy goes down. And he's taking enough time to answer those questions. It's 2 minutes, 37 per incorrect question. Now, what would you infer when you spend enough time per question but not get answer any one of them correctly? What you infer is, hey, I can answer medium questions, okay, I can answer hard questions, okay, medium hard questions, okay, but when it comes to hard questions, I'm sorry, that's where I have a problem. So it's not that I need to learn the concepts in arithmetic, it's not that I need to learn the methods, it's only where the difficulty level increases to hard is where I need to spend my time over there. And if I can perfect my methods to solving questions, I can go from that 43 out of 60 to a 49 in arithmetic fairly easily. That's about 4 to 5 days of effort to go there. And this insight which says, hey, you don't need to go back to stage 1, but you need to focus on this difficulty questions is very critical. Okay, so what insights do you get? You get your subsectional abilities, of course. You also get what difficulty level of questions do you struggle to answer, and then this is in each of those 5 subsections, and has timing impacted your performance on the test. And the third piece over here is you see the last block. He didn't have enough time per question. He made these 3 mistakes. He only spent 30 seconds per question. So even though this question difficulty level was medium hard, I am not going to consider this accuracy over here. Why? Because he didn't have enough time to solve questions. So for me, he still has the ability to answer medium hard questions because he's proven that ability properly over here. And so timing did impact his score by about 2 to 3 points in arithmetic overall. So it tells you this is just because you have this block level architecture, it tells you the extent to which timing did have an impact. Okay, so if you want to take a Sigma X mock, see where you stand, you can just go to egmat.com/sigmax to get there, or you can click on this button in the PDF. Again, as a case study of how a student went from a score of 700 to 750 by just looking at the insights from Sigma X mock, and he was able to do that in about a week. Now, you have your starting abilities. You know where you need to focus on. The next thing is to really set those milestones. And how do you do that? We've built a tool called GMAT Planner. It's an AI-driven tool that allows each one of you to build your own personalized study plan. Students have built, our students have built upwards of 10,000 personalized study plans using this tool. Each one of those plans has been unique and personalized to those students. So it's not about 2 or 3 study plans, it's about 10,000 odd study plans. Now, then you personalize your learning, and which is kind of where we're going to take a case study with Chase and Abby, and we're going to really see how and where they're going to spend their time. Okay, but remember, this is the first slide. What does the study plan do? It tells you how would you reach your target GMAT score, how much time do you need to put in, and where you need to put in that time. So for Chase and Abby, we're going to do all of that. So let's quantify your starting abilities. Okay, so both Chase and Abby need to go from a score of 600 to 740, and for Abby, she's someone who's stronger in verbal than in quant. So her quant score is Q42, verbal score is V31. So I'd say these are balanced starting scores around the 50th percentile in both. Chase, on the other hand, much stronger in quant than in verbal. Okay, now who identifies themselves with Chase or Abby over here? Who identifies themselves with Chase or Abby? Let's see. Any Chase or Abby here? All right. So for Abby, just to simplify things, because you're going to see a lot of numbers over here. Let's say her starting abilities in arithmetic and algebra are similar, and we're going to do the same thing for Chase as well at 42, and for Abby, and 72 each for Chase. And then on the verbal side of things, for Abby, her starting abilities are around that 60th percentile in each of the subsections, and for Chase, it's around that 34th, 35th percentile on the verbal subsections. So if you combine these, you're going to find you get to these quant and verbal scores. So first question for you, do you think Abby and Chase need to achieve the same quant and verbal scores to get to that 740 score? Do they need to put in the same amount of time in quant and verbal? And the third thing, which probably is the most important thing, do they need to study the same content in quant and verbal? The answer to each one of these questions is no. They don't need to get to the same. They don't need to achieve the same quant and verbal scores, the times that you're going to really see in quant and verbal are going to be different, and the content that they study is going to be different as well. So how do they set those milestones? Now they know their starting abilities. They go to GMAT Planner, and for Abby, these are the milestones that you see. On the quant side of things, Abby is going to go from a Q42 to a Q48, where she's going to go from a 42 percentile abilities to a 65th percentile ability over here. On the verbal side of things, she's going to go from a V31 to V42. Verbal is her strength, and she's going to hit that 90th percentile in pretty much everything. Okay, so where does Abby spend her time? And let me just see if I can make it a bit more easy to read over there. So that we make it a bit bigger. So you can see Abby spends about six to 6.5 weeks on verbal. Why? Because verbal is her strength. That's what's driving a majority of her score. And then she spends about 2.5 weeks on quant. Oh, sorry, that's Chase. Yeah, so 2.5 weeks on quant and about 6 weeks on verbal. Now, where does Chase spend his time? Remember, Chase was stronger in quant. He takes his quant to Q50. We don't recommend aiming for Q51. Why? Because getting a Q51 can be a bit challenging. But essentially, we do recommend aiming for a Q50, because Q50s people get it much more consistently, and accordingly, Chase will have to get to a V40, which is around that 90th percentile. So where would Chase spend his time? Not as much time on quant. You can really see about a week on quant to improve to that Q50, but then a lot more time on verbal over here. Now, just to summarize the difference in time. So Chase versus Abby, Chase is aiming for a V40, a 90th percentile. Abby is aiming for 96th percentile. And you may say this seems very different, but on the quant side, these scores are very different. A Q48 is very different from a Q50. But that's not the point over here. The point is, how much time are they spending? And for Chase, he's spending 9 weeks on verbal, which is 50% more than what Abby is spending, and just about 1.5 weeks on quant. Abby is spending 6 weeks on verbal, and twice as much time on quant. And this is really critical. Why? Because if you were Chase and you really say you have to hit that 90th percentile in 6 weeks, you're going to really struggle to do that. And you're going to rush through things. You're going to make all the mistakes that we talked about. On the other hand, if you tell Abby you've got to hit that 60th percentile in quant in about a week and a half, she's going to make the same mistakes. So bad estimates lead to bad actions lead to stagnant scores. So having those right estimates is really critical. But then that's not where the difference ends. The biggest difference is, where do they spend this time? And that's where getting those starting abilities is really important. Remember, if you're 25th percentile or lower, you still have to learn concepts. If you're around that 50th percentile, you've learned application, but you've not mastered it. If you're around that 80th percentile, you've mastered that application, and then to that 90th percentile, you've got refining to perfection. So where does Abby spend her time? And you can really see her starting scores around that 60th percentile on pretty much every subsection of verbal, and around that 40th percentile on quant. So Abby is not going to spend a ton of time in learning concepts and application. She's going to spend a good chunk of her time in mastering application and refining to perfection. And that's going to be the case on every aspect of verbal. On quant, it's going to be the other way. She's going to focus a majority of her time on learning those concepts. She still doesn't know all the concepts. And again, if she takes diagnostics, she can even get more fine-grained diagnostics around number properties, word problems, and so on and so forth, and then mastering that application. Now remember, Abby doesn't need to hit a Q50. She's not aiming for that. So she's not going to spend a ton of time on refining to perfection. Okay. So again, even though Abby is going to spend 6 weeks on verbal, where she spends that time is very critical. It's very different from Chase. Why? Because where does Chase spend his time? Chase is in the 30th percentiles on the verbal section. He's going to spend a lot of time over here first, And then he's also going to spend time to refine to perfection. Now remember, Chase had 3 weeks per verbal subsection. And it's those 3 weeks per verbal subsection that allow him to do each one of these 3 steps. Had he not budgeted those 3 weeks, he wouldn't have been able to do these 3 steps. On the arithmetic side, he's already fairly good. He only needs to refine to perfection. He's not going to learn a ton of concepts. He's actually not going to learn any concept. He's not going to learn how to apply those. He's going to just focus on those hard questions that we talked about and then fix that. So again, when you take that case study, you kind of realize the difference between Abby and Chase. You kind of realize where they spend time truly determines how likely are they to hit those target scores. Does this make sense, guys? Given their starting abilities, given what they know. So even though both of them are aiming for that identical score, even their path to getting to that 740 score, the amount of time required, and where they're learning from and what they're learning is very different. And understanding that difference is key to them getting to that 740 score. Okay. So with that, I've come to the end of this webinar. Just to summarize, your GMAT score is composed of 5 independent subsectional abilities, and those subsectional abilities define which stage of learning you are in. Once you know the stage of learning you are in, that then defines how you approach that. Okay. If you want to hit that 90th percentile efficiently in the first go without wasting time and money on taking the GMAT multiple times, you've got to do the stages properly. And solving thousands of questions is not the way to get to that 90th percentile. Also, if you want to create that personalized study plan, get to those starting abilities, be using a Sigma X mock, use GMAT Planner to define those target abilities, and then have that mechanism to track your performance in every stage. It's really important to get that feedback when you're doing stage 1. It's really important to get the analytics when you're doing stage 2 and stage 3, so that you can really know how well you're doing. And if you need help, you can always write to me at rajat@gmat.com. All right, with that, I want to thank you guys, and I'd be happy to take on any questions that you have. Okay, Krishna says, I'm facing difficulty with geometry. When I read the question, it's difficult to solve the problem, but when I see the solution, I can feel it's so simple and easy. Any advice on it? So Krishna, great question. So this is a classical, the question is a classical indication of the difficulty level of question that you're solving is higher than what your abilities. Remember, even when you solve a hard question, if you are at that 40th, 50th percentile, you'll be able to understand the solution. But does this mean you're going to be able to solve the same question again? No. So I would recommend that you actually reduce that difficulty. You need to have a medium hard question, then a hard question, or a medium difficulty question. So yes, a difficult question will seem simple if you have a good access to a good solution. It doesn't mean you are there yet. So reduce the difficulty level of question and gradually improve to it. That's number 1. Number 2 is make notes while solving questions with regards to where you faltered, why you faltered. One of the things that I would really do is, even when you saw that question, were you able to create an approach towards the solution? I mean, when I solve a quant question, I'm able to visualize the solution. And if you're unable to visualize the solution, that's a clear indication that that question is beyond your ability right now. And that's where you need to reduce that difficulty level. I mean, a hard question in geometry would require 2 or 3 levels of 2 or 3 stages of solving. If you can only visualize to stage 2, then make sure that you get really good at accessing to and visualizing to stage 2. Once you get really good at it, you'll be able to get visualized to stage 3 as well. Accessing GMAT Planner, you'd probably have to schedule a session to do that, Shrey. So, and then this typically gets busy, so make sure that you schedule one in advance and work with one of our GMAT strategy experts to get that. All right, any other questions, guys? Anupama says, I'm super weak at quant maths. I'm from psychology background. I got a V32 and a Q15. How many months should I devote to hit that 700 plus? Okay. And Harish says, how similar are Sigma X mock scores compared to them? So Harish, your question is fairly easy. Sigma X mock scores are very, very similar to what they get on the actual GMAT. I'd say within 20 points. Anupama, from a V15, from a Q15 to, want to hit a 700 plus. So let's say you want to hit a 700. Let's get to Anupama's question. And let's kind of get to and see if I can work this question out on this. So Anupama wants to get to a 700 score. And I'm going to really just swing it, Anupama, right now. So you get about an 80% answer, not a 100% answer. So a 700, I would say, let's say we say you get a V40 because you're already at a V31, and then you need a Q45. So a V40 Q45 will get you to a 700. To go from a Q15 a Q45, you'd probably need about 10 weeks on quant. And then to go from a V31 to a V40, you'd probably need between 3 to 4 weeks. So you're looking at about 14 weeks over here, essentially. 14 to 16, I'd just really say, because no one can study consistently for 14 weeks. So 16 weeks, that's about 4 months. Okay. Does that help, Anupama? All right. Abhishek, is it possible to avail a course only for SC? We don't offer that, Abhishek, but if you just want to avail the course for SC, I would recommend that you buy Verbal Online for 1 month. We do offer monthly plans right now. And that would give you access to Scholarinium. That would give you, for all subsections, that will also give you access to a CR and RC. But again, you have to know if you just need it just for SC. I think that's something we should be very sure about. Most people think they just need it for SC, but they end up using for CR as well. So again, if you think you only need it for SC, you're at that V36, you want to get to just V40 and SC is the only thing, then yeah, avail it for a month. How do you calculate a subsectional percentage? All right, how does one calculate your subsectional percentage? A very crude way of doing it, Shrey. I mean, we have data from those 40,000 students, so we actually calculate your weighted scores and then do a reverse lookup. That's a methodology that the GMAT uses. That's a methodology that we use as well. But here is what I would say. You need, the first thing that you need is categorize questions for easy, medium, hard. The second thing is take a quiz with 5 easy, 5 medium, and 5 hard. And for hard questions, give yourself 3 points. For medium questions, give yourself 2 points. And for easy questions, give yourself 1 point. This is a very crude way. It'll get you within 15 percentile points, essentially, and get in your weighted score. That weighted score is your ability within 10 to 12 percentile points. That's a very crude way of doing it, is what I would say. Does that help you, Shrey? Anupama, coming back to your point, there's something which I tell a lot of students, which is when you see that first score, don't feel disheartened. Why? Because someone may get a 650 in their first mock, others may get a 400. It doesn't matter, or a few things that don't matter. One is it doesn't matter what your starting score is. What matters is, hey, what your ending score is. Another thing that doesn't matter is how long does it take for you to get to that 740, 730, or 700 score. Why? Because in the end, a 700 score is a 700 score. Anyone who gets it in 2 weeks also gets the same credit as someone who gets it in 2 months or 6 months overall. So your starting score only means that you need to put in more effort and be willing to put in more effort. That's all there is to it. You're at V21, Vivek says, I want to get to V35. What's your question, Vivek? How do you go to V35? Again, you got to really first take a Sigma X mock to create those subsectional percentiles. Then you need to go through the stages of learning and track your improvement. I mean, exactly what we talked about over here. You are Chase in this case. And again, completing all, again, Vivek, when you say you've completed all OG, what are you telling me? You're telling me that you didn't do stage 1, but you tried to do stage 2, and that's where you're still at V21. You're the classical case that we talked about here in terms of the mistakes. If you don't have a foundation, doing OG will not do you any good. It's like you're going to the gym and saying, I'm going to lift. Yeah, you can do Scholaranium. If you don't have the stage 1, doing Scholaranium is not going to help you either. It's no different than doing the official guide. Scholaranium only gives you much higher quality solution. You have to prove to me that you've done stage 1 properly. Then we can talk about Scholaranium. Just to really tell you the statistic, okay? People who do stage 1 properly, and you know, on the e-GMAT platform, upwards of 2,000 students log in every day. Upwards of 2,000 students. So we get a ton of data for you guys. And the people who do stage 1 properly, 99% of them start at upwards of 47 percentile ability in Scholaranium in stage 2. 47 percentile ability, if you're doing stage 1 properly, is already closer to that V29 score. You're at V21. And we track each one of these. We have 3 people who just respond to your strategy emails. 100% of the time, that's all that they do. Each one of them takes care of 15 to 20 case studies every day. From 200 to 730, what is the best study plan? How many hours? Again, I'll have to go into GMAT Planner, but I mean, you're looking at Letitia, you're looking at closer to about 4 to 5 months. And then that study plan, again, you'll have to start with stage 1 of every subsection. Anupama, if you take a 1 month off course from by e-GMAT, it's not a 1 month course, it's a subscription for 1 month. Okay. If you are at a V31, you'd probably need about a month to month and a half, but that's all right. Do you also get feedback? Yes, you get 87 points of feedback in stage 1 and SC. Just to really tell you feedback, just an SC in stage 1, you get 87 points of feedback. In stage 2, you get 20 to 30. And in stage 3, about 10 points. Okay, so this is just in SC. The same thing happens in CR and RC and number properties and arithmetic and so algebra and word problems and so on and so forth. All right, Sujata says, I'm at V25 and Q37. How much time would it take for me to reach 720? Well, let's see if we can So I think, Sujata, the best way is if you go to gmatplanner.com and let me just and schedule a consultation. So let me just share the link with you over here. So that's something that you can really do, and over there. But overall, V27 720 for you would be a Q48 V40. Okay, so if you're already at a V25 Q37, again, I'm going to do an approximate. You are at about, you're right now at about a 550 for me. You're going to go to a 730. I would say you need about 200 hours of effort. So 200 hours typically is about 3 months for most people. Yeah, 2.5 to 3 months. Again, if you're working full time and if you're doing this. Okay. All right, guys, if there are no Black Friday discounts, well, so I don't do discounts in the company. Our salespeople do some discounts if you want. So you know, reach out to rajat@e-gmat.com and you know, ask for it. So I'm not responsible for sales. I'm responsible for product. I'm responsible for good practices while learning. So yeah. Letitia says, I've heard that verbal is more hard than quant. Is that true in the test? I actually think quant's more hard than verbal, because there's just scoring high in quant is more hard than verbal, just because there's so many people who are good at quant. Again, remember, GMAT's a comparative test. So it just depends on, I mean, if you ask a Chinese or a South Korean, is verbal hard? They're gonna really say yes, verbal is harder. Why? Because they're really good in quant. The median score for a South Korean is Q48. On the other hand, if you ask an American, they'll say, hey, verbal is super easy, quant's hard. Median score for Americans for quant is much lower. It's around, I think, Q39 or so. So it just depends on who you are. But the good thing is, if you go through the stages of learning, acing the GMAT is not rocket science. It's just about being methodical. And the nice thing is, whether it comes to verbal or quant, you know, you don't need to be a grammarian or a voracious reader on verbal to ace GMAT verbal. Similarly, you don't need to be a mathematician to ace GMAT quant. Why? Because the test is designed to be that way. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for being with me today. You know, do register for our next set of sessions by visiting e-GMAT.com. And so if you go to the bottom of the page, you'd be able to register for the upcoming free sessions. And Sai, yes, I'd love to take your interview. By the way, what Sai is talking about is we have these close to 80 success story interviews on our YouTube channel. You can watch them. They're unedited interviews. So you can do that. How many universities can you apply with a score? You know, GMAT's accepted at more than 5,000 universities, but yeah, I mean, 710, 730, you can pretty much apply to most universities. With 500, very few would entertain you. Okay, guys, with that, thank you very much. If you still have questions, do write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com, and I'd be happy to address those questions.